Any projects under 2 million. Last time round we had that certainty at this point in time, but we don't have that at this stage. They're not moderating that till next week, and we won't know where we sit with our program until July. And all of these programs, both the continuous and the low cost, low risk programs, won't be confirmed until the board meeting in August. So there's a significant delay across the country in this area. So what we find is that our continuous program, our 10-year plan has 36.54 million in our 10-year plan for these works, and we've got approval for 34.25 million. So we effectively have a reduction of 2.33 million that we need to figure out. So in the last week we've spent a bit of time trying to analyse how we could do that, knowing that our budgets and what we came up with were fairly robust basic budgets to maintain our networks, and it's really hard to find these savings, to be honest. There are three basic options. We maintain the program at that $36 million figure, and we fund the shortfall that Waka Kotahi share, which is about 1.19 million, which is an effective increase on rates of 0.4%. The other option is to reduce the program to match the funding, so we reduce it down to the 34.25 across the board. But there is a third option to be cost neutral, and that's to keep our funding share in there, so we can play around a little bit. And so Waka Kotahi share reduces, but we keep our share in there, so which is effectively keeping that 1.14 in, but we don't get subsidy, so effectively 100% subsidy on a portion of that, if that makes sense. We want to I've said core assets, but we want to make sure that our basic infrastructure assets don't deteriorate any further, and we've got real work to do on our roads in terms of the pavements. There's some fixed costs in terms of lights and power supply, signage, drainage. We can't reduce drainage. We have to clear the leaf fall, we have to clear the drains, we have to maintain drainage to maintain our roading networks. So we really have only a few options where we could look at reducing the program, and we're really looking at what the level of service could be across potentially cycle path maintenance, footpath renewals. Cycle path maintenance is an area where we've stepped it up in the program in the LTP. So the next slide is an attempt to, it's a pretty tricky to see, but basically the blue one is option one, which is increasing the rates to keep the current program and fund Waka Kotahi's share that they reduced. Option two is to reduce the rates down and reduce the program, and option three is cost neutral, where we leave our share in. So what you can see over the three areas that we've tried to analyse quickly in the last week, and it's high level at this stage, is cycle path maintenance, and this is a 3-year block of funding that you can see here, so it's not saying what's in years 1, 2 or 3, because with Waka Kotahi funding we can spend that block of money at any point in those 3 years. So we can spend more in year 1, less in year 3. It's up to us how we do that. Cycle path maintenance overall, we were looking on the different options. If we keep our money in there and keep it cross neutral, there's an effective reduction of $500,000 on what we were currently proposing in our LTP, and that cycle path maintenance includes lichen spraying, grinding, where we can grind down for trip hazards, and any patching type work. Footpath renewals is where we're actually fixing bits of the network. We're actually taking out and putting bits back in, and we're looking at reducing that from $3 million, which is $1 million spend, to potentially 860 odd, so $500,000 reduction over the 3 years. Footpath maintenance, cycle path maintenance, we don't do a lot there at the moment in terms of sweeping the cycle paths. We're cleaning them, clearing them of debris to make them smoother and safer for people. So we ramped up the budgets in this round, as I understand, to enable that work to happen. So we're faced with a potential need to reduce. So those are the options for you, and we'll leave that for you to consider as you go forward.
Can I just stop you there, because there is a number of questions before we continue on, otherwise we'll go down a pathway of people trying to remember where they wanted to ask questions. So I think I'll run it like that, if I may. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thank you. My question is for you, Sandra. Over this last year, we've seen, when tenders have come to us, we've seen increases in costs. So my question really is around going forward, and tenders have had cost increases. So it's really around putting this to us and then going forward and having cost increases on this budget. So I know you're giving us a figure of saying that we've got 2.33 million that we had to save, and so we're going forward with a budget that's got a reduction already and for the next year, and we're also challenged with prices that are going to be reduced, potentially with contractors that we're going out there. And I'm just trying to foresee what's going to happen in the next year.
Yeah, if you want to.
Tēnā koutou, Mr Mayor, councillors, through the chair. Whilst the deliverability review has been looking at all of that, and I'll talk to that in a minute, the tender that goes, the contract that goes live in July, which is our new roading maintenance contract, will cover all of this work, and it has not just fees, rates locked in for the first year, but agreed normal rates of escalation. So we shouldn't get caught up in more cost building through the contract.
So that's a guarantee.
There may be some things that, in contracts, everything's only as strong as the contract. So there may be unexpected things that come through that cost extra that no one's anticipated. And that's always the case in contracts. But for as much as we can robustly control it, it is robustly controlled.
Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks for the presentation. What was our budget for the previous period, same period? So what's the increase? Yep. So we at the moment we've got 36 point. So what was the previous? So what was the percentage increase that we've put it up from last time?
It's effectively the same as what we were given last time. So the last NLTB bid was around the 34.2.
So there's no increase.
There's been a slight deduction of a couple of $100.
Okay, thank you.
And councillors, the letter that came to from Nicole Rosie, from CEO of Waka Kotahi NZTA, to Heather and myself, was we'd asked for 39,724,000, obviously with a business case behind that, and our indicative funding approval gross is 34,205,000. My understanding is we're one of the better ones. Just about everybody around us in similar sizes has been cut, and some quite significantly. So I think we're doing as well as we could have expected from a really, really depleted government budget. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Sandra and Sarah. The graph that you've got on the screen there, I assume that there is a sort of a mix and match option where we could choose to say match the footpath maintenance and perhaps slightly reduce renewals or cycle path maintenance. It's not, it has to be exactly like that.
Yeah, very good question, and we agree. So you'll notice later when the resolution's being proposed that we're not actually proposing it in any particular area, because this is very new information for us and we're not really in a position to make strong decisions about that. So we will have to figure out how to deal with that within the long-term plan, but right now, as of today, we're not necessarily proposing that this is exactly what we're asking for. We're just talking in a bulk sum.
Okay, so are you looking for direction, or is that, or do we still have to wait until we get the exact figure to know?
I think we're looking for direction in the budget.
Okay.
as the whole budget pocket. However, what we're suggesting is that we would use professional judgment in order to define which areas we suggest is the best use of that money.
Yeah, so it's the total rather than how it's distributed.
That's what we're asking in our resolution today.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on the information to screen here, we've obviously done a big audit of all the problems in the footpath network and then had a work plan that I had sort of a number of years, and we were talking with the community about after a number of years, all those major faults would be solved. Have we done the analysis here to understand how much this would push out the program of work before we would actually have the network up to scratch?
If I could ask Robert to help with this, and he's got an intimate knowledge of where we're at.
Yes, thank you, councillors. We have done surveys of the network and identified large numbers of what we call critical faults. So something like anything between 2,800 and 2,900 faults across the network. It's a moving feast because obviously bits of footpath keep changing, but currently we've been managing to remedy around 600 of those a year. So based on that $1 million spend. So if we continued with $1 million, we would be still looking at 5 years. So cutting that to 800,000, we would add at least a year before we would address that backlog. So,
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Back to the officers.
I'm shortly just going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk you through the deliverability review, but the purpose of this slide is really just to say that attachment 4, the carry forwards, the council decision and the budget corrections as per the information in the report, and the financials that Stuart will talk you through shortly includes the information within attachment 4 and attachment 5, which Sarah is going to now walk you through. So.
Thank you. I've been speaking to you all about the deliverability review for a little while now. Appendix 5 shows you in detail the findings of the deliverability review. Essentially, we started by looking at cost, bringing the cost up to look at the industry cost increases. These are things like rising land costs, that the potential costs of materials and equipment that we have to bring in from overseas, driving up costs of resources because of the lack of current resource availability, and also looking in the deliverability review at some of the risks that council can't control and how we deal with those in a budget sense. So we started by looking up, then we started to look at actually what we were able to deliver in year 1, based on, in part, some of those risks we can't control, based on some of the other elements that we were prioritising, like where infrastructure is enabling other infrastructure, and we were also sense-checking around scopes and risk, and sense-checking particularly the risk of failure if we spread things out. The key findings from the deliverability review, looking at increasing cost and whether we spread deliverability out a bit, the majority of the programme is robust. With the review that we've done, we have confidence for year 1 in the budgets, but we know that future price changes are definite with some of the escalations that we're seeing at the moment, to Councillor Hupperter's point earlier. So we are expecting rapid cost escalations to continue. We know that we're going to see long lead-in times for some assets, 8 months for some pieces of kit that we need to order from overseas. We also know that because infrastructure is necessary as an enabler, we really need to understand our linkages when we look at project planning. Something else that really came up, because there's so much growth at the moment, in our capital budgets new budgets for the next 3 years, there's quite an element of growth. Up to 25% of our budget in the first year is on growth. Some of that means that we can't control it ourselves because growth is driven by developers, not just us. This slide, the blue is capital new, the orange is renewals, the grey is growth, and you'll see that in year one, growth is a quarter of the capital. Our renewal budget stays relatively constant, although the pie actually increases. What that orange value is pretty much the same over time. So it's not actually reducing, it's just that the amount of capital new is increasing. Bearing in mind that whilst the renewal budget stays the same, with cost escalation, if we get significant cost escalation, the amount of work done might reduce slightly over the 3 years. So the end result of the deliverability review, essentially we reduced the amount of new capital and renewal capital new capital mainly for year one, moved some of it into years 2 and 3. Those minuses show increase. We had a minimal impact on rates, but by moving some of the programme across to years 2 and 3, that allows us to build up the resources that we need to deliver, particularly through our supply chains, and it allows us to bundle work more so that we have more security, one, of people bidding to do it, and 2, of actually being able to deliver it as planned packages of work. So we have proposed in section attachment 5, we have proposed a number of changes that cover both cost increases and slight changes to programme, plus a couple of elements that came through as things where we thought they were included as budgets because they were versus scope, but where there wasn't actually a budget there. Cuba Street, stage 3, sorry, that's a correction, stage 3, not stage 4, for example. That's the end of my presentation on attachment 5.
Sorry, Sarah, we've got more questions, so...
That's fine.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Sarah. Just firstly, the presentation that's in front of us, has that been provided to elected members along with the financials that are on the screen in any of our papers already?
The presentation today?
Yeah.
We were finalising up until late last night, but obviously we can circulate an electronic copy today.
Okay, so the impact of the changes that are outlined in attachment 5, which we have got, which is a number of individual programs with significant changes to, some significant changes to the amounts, where would we be able to find the impact on our overall financial statements as outlined in our draft plan?
That'll come out in the next set of slides as soon as these questions are finished through the chair.
So are you saying that we just need to take that and now absorb it, remember it, and then make decisions on it today as a result? I guess I'm just trying to understand the process.
Well, Councillor, all your base information is in all the consultation documents and all the program lines. What we're dealing with at the moment is, I suppose, the carry forwards and the Waka Kotahi things are the only things that are new, my understanding. Am I correct in that?
So...
You're correct. However, attachment 5 of your papers for today has all of the details that make these numbers up. So what we've tried to do is say this is what was in the plan that we consulted on and this is what we're proposing going forward. So effectively what we're asking for, I guess, is decisions about whether that's agreeable.
So looking at the all the programs that are identified in attachment 5, there are some as significant as an additional 5 million, for example, to the program 1695 PNITI. So is there anywhere where there's the changes are totaled so that we can see the total impact on our budgets that these changes, obviously on the, just on the screen that's provided here, is that?
Yeah, I think we've just... had a moment where we thought we should have put that in the papers and totals, and I'm not sure we've done that, so apologies for that. At the moment, what's in front of you is the sum proposed totals of those deliverability review changes. Yeah.
Which is the capital.
We can email councillors the slides now and get some hard copies done for the course of the day. Bearing in mind the purpose of the presentation at the moment is to give you an overview of the material, and then we're able to dig deeper into attachments 4, 5, 6, the Waka Kotahi stuff as you start to debate those matters.
Okay. I'll leave it there for now, thanks.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Sarah. I've got a couple of questions for you. So the deliverability review was based on the draft 10-year plan in its current form. So I'm just wondering how, considering that there is a range of additional recommendations already proposed for today, and there may be others coming from the floor, how would that impact what the recommendations are with the budgets and the timings? Because you've based that on the current draft, but anything significant that could come in could also put additional pressures on the workforce or availability of people to do the work. I'm just trying, do you know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to understand how that would impact, or is this more of a broader review?
Through the chair, from my perspective, as I said, well, I'm just going to take you back a slide. I think if you suggest more things today, the renewal budget, if you suggest things that are coming into renewal budgets, that will be easily deliverable. If you're suggesting things that are capital new, that will be more easily deliverable because we're going to bundle up the renewal contracts early. If you're suggesting things that are coming into capital new, all of them, we would have to look at to see how much planning they would take if people are asking us to deliver them in year one. Because generally speaking, anything major in infrastructure takes a while to plan and consent and design before you go to delivery.
Okay. And then just with regard to your timing of the deliverability, does that take into account significant regional projects that also may be putting pressure on the workforce?
Through the chair, it does to an extent that we know that we need to bundle up work and package it and make it attractive to compete with some of the big other elements out there. Going forward, part of our planning work will be to work more with some of those other big buyers out there to make sure that we're not all trying to compete for the same resources at the same time.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Sarah. Could you just put the slide with the totals back up? So, first of all, thank you for looking at the deliverability, because I think it is something that has concerned us as to whether or not what we're proposing is actually doable. But secondly, where you've got the totals along the bottom there, is there an overall change in the amount that's been spent over those 3 years, or is it more a question of timing?
Through the chair, yes, there is a slight upward increase in what's been spent over the 3 years. It's not just timing, it is picking up that things are likely to cost more.
Okay, I thought so, but just to clarify. And also, this is referring to all of the capital, so new and renewals altogether, is it? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
That's back to you.
Sorry, good morning all. So what does that mean? And so this graph is having a look at rates. Now, when we describe the rates comparison year on year for the purposes of this graph to make sense. We've excluded the bid, so you'll recall that the bid's around a 0.2% of a rates increase. So for like comparisons, this graph doesn't represent the total rates increase, but it represents the year-to-year comparison. And so you'll remember in the draft we went out with a 6.9% proposal, and right now what we've done is we've included all of those items in Appendix 4 and 5 of your papers, except for the last two in Appendix 5, which are a couple of capital programs, because we require decisions as to whether they're to be included or not. So with all of those numbers included, the modelling shows that we're looking at a 7.1% rates increase for next year, which is the blue line on the graph. That's 0.2 higher. The biggest driver in terms of that increase is a slight increase in cost for renewals. And so there's a number of renewal programs in Appendix 5, which have just been referred to, that are cost increases. They total about 170,000 all up. There are a couple of council decisions that have been made around the IT security work and a couple of other small ones that have contributed to that, and a slightly lower opening debt position than what we had proposed, but not a lot. So the overall increase is at 7.1. The following 2 years have not moved significantly, and from years 4, 5, 6 out, we really haven't changed a lot of the numbers in terms of what's been proposed for today. You'll see the proposed policy limit in the grey reduces reasonably significantly, and we end up over that for a couple of years. That's probably not a significant issue. It's much like budgeting for a surplus or a deficit. If you budget for a deficit, you need to make that decision consciously, and that's why we've included that in here, the red line for reference. In terms of debt, it's probably not a great surprise that if we add $15 million worth of additional cost, those debt figures are not quite as low as they were after the first 3 years. And obviously the big uptake years 4, 5 and 6 around the wastewater treatment plant remain. But as I say, for the first 3 years we're under our own prudential limit of 200%, bearing in mind the LGFA limit at the moment is at that 300% mark. And as a council, for the first part of the plan we're looking pretty good. The purpose of this slide was just to mention those two items that are not currently sitting in those numbers.
So we're getting towards the end now. We're just going to run you through the consultation process and the results of that, and then some next steps. So the consultation process was a deliberate framing of the consultation as a prioritising exercise, particularly in terms of the sort of byline, what really matters. So there was a range of activities to raise awareness and invite participation. Some new things we tried, a big focus on the postcard form, which was really successful, and the majority of the submissions came through in that form. Supported networks to run their own activities, so they hosted the council, and we talked them through the draft 10-year plan. A couple of Facebook Live sessions, which had some reasonable numbers sit throughout the duration of that. Some good work working with schools. There's an image there of some Palmy Boys students working on their submissions. So in terms of outcomes, so 717 submissions in total, so that was up from 2018. As I said earlier, the bulk of those came through in the postcard style form. The 59 online long submissions, 191 emailed, 38 paper long, 13 written submissions, and a couple of others. So for some feedback, it was relatively, I guess a slight priority towards goal 1 and 2, but a reasonable spread across the 4 goals and the other matters in terms of the topics within the submissions. Some frequently occurring topics, which I'm sure you all have seen come through in the submissions and the hearings. Importance of focusing on essential infrastructure, planning for a safe transport system with more active and public transport, including road maintenance and footpath maintenance. So certainly in terms of that resident survey, the area that is consistently ranked the sort of lowest in terms of feedback to the council is our maintenance of our transport network, which is something you may want to think about in terms of the decisions around the Waka Kotahi funding. Big focus on housing demand and affordability, including social housing. Need for more aquatic sports facilities, city centre amenity, and typically we get a lot of submissions around ideas for more things to do. Typically a big focus on recreational activities in that space. So I'm just going to hand over to Stuart.
So I guess the main purpose of today is to make some decisions as to what the budgets look like long term. What we'll do, you'll notice the whiteboard on the screen, is just kind of keep a running total from a percentage perspective. As your decisions are made, we'll update the board so you can see where we're at. Once the budgets are determined, the rates for next year will be calculated reflecting those budgets. We don't anticipate at this stage really any significant change in terms of those targeted rates. There may be some relatively small changes, but I don't think anything that we've seen so far will materially change those calculations in terms of what was in the draft. We don't propose any changes to the revenue and financing policies or the significance and engagement policies. We appreciate there may be some small changes to the strategies and plans going forward coming out of today, and the development contributions policy will be updated to reflect the final budget. Obviously there's some programs in there that impact some of those calculations, so that will come out of this meeting as well. And speed through it now. So today we are obviously seeking some endorsement of what's put in the papers in front of you. Waka Kotahi, we've had a good discussion about. We need some decisions regarding that. There are a few other items in attachment 6 from officers, and then we really need to have, I guess, a robust discussion on the changes decided in light of those submissions, which is kind of on you. What next? So what we need really to come from today and Friday potentially is enough information to put the plan together, as David described earlier. And on the 23rd of June, we're hoping to get approval of that plan. And then 7th of July is adoption date from our perspective, where the plan is adopted and also all of those policies and procedures. So I think, unless David's got anything else, that's us done with our presentation. Open to questions.
Yes, we do. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks for the additional information. Just given that we haven't got in front of us the financial impact of what's incorporated in attachment 4 and 5 and in our papers, I'm just wondering the capital expenditure programs for the first 3 years in our draft long-term plan of 98, 102 and 118 million. What would the totals of our capital expenditure be with the attachment 4 and 5 as outlined included?
I'm just going to have a quick look at Grant. I think we will be able to put that up on the board in terms of that total capex.
Okay. Yeah, it would be useful to have that context when we're making decisions. The other question is, in terms of the deliverability review and what's proposed is to add an additional 15 million in, was there any consideration from officers in recognising that additional cost, that perhaps there would be some reprioritisation of programs rather than simply just adding that on top of the draft numbers?
Through the chair, when I talked about looking at risk earlier, part of what we were looking at in the risk was how we could spread things out further. So they're not just spread into the first 3 years. Some of them go beyond that because we are seeking to spread things out earlier, further rather than earlier. Quite a lot of the elements that we were looking at were elements where there is a risk of failure of current assets. So in terms of priority, we spread out where we could, but we were constrained to some extent. We were seeking to work within the overall rates cap as much as we could, but we were constrained to some extent by some potential failure risks if we don't do some of the work that we need to do in the first 3 years.
Okay, so can I just further to that, can I take from that you didn't give consideration to any of the capital new programs as in terms of, when I say reprioritising?
Not to cut, we might have moved some out a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions. One is on page 85 of our order paper. I just wanted to understand under 2.1.7, the adjustment to the CEDA contract, halfway down the page, it mentions the council decision to reduce the grant by 200,000, but then it mentions around compensating increases for events budgets, so the total was unchanged. Can I understand where that decision to balance it back up again was made? Was that formal or been informal?
Well, the resolution passed in December 21 delegated the authority for the Chief Executive to negotiate changes to the CEDA contract that removes certain functions and that those functions were going to come in-house. So the result of that was the functions that were transferred from CEDA to council were costed, and then the corresponding reduction is allocated to those functions that are now delivered in-house. So it was a consequence of the decision you made in December 21 to authorise the Chief Executive to negotiate those changes.
Okay, happy with that. And just finally, Mr. Mayor, on page 87, I just want to be clear on those budget corrections and adjustments. So the one referencing iwi funding and the one around the Calvin Grove Community Centre's car park, I understand that they're in the budget and there's no need to debate them to be included now. Is that correct?
That's not quite correct. So they are, when we put the draft plan together, we made 2 errors. And so while decisions were made by council to include the Calvin Grove car park, for example, it was omitted from the draft. It was a mistake, and so this is a correction of that mistake, and I believe the iwi one's in the same boat, so the decision has been made, but the budgets weren't put together appropriately and properly, and so this is a correction.
And we'll need to move those today to be included formally, or is, I want to know, do we need to action resolutions along that line?
Yeah, I mean, technically, perhaps not, but it is part of attachment 4, and so we're hoping just to I guess, get implicit approval again. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, clear.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I do have some more general questions. Is this an appropriate time to ask them, or are we doing that later?
No, can do it now. Yep.
Okay, well, one anyway relates to Appendix 4. So on page 84, 2.11, the animal shelter new building. Oh, sorry, actually it might be Appendix 5. Sorry, Appendix 5. The suggestion has been to reduce the budget that's in 21-22 and push that budget into 22-23. And I see people are looking for papers. Do you want me to stop for a minute while you find it? Anyway, I just want to check what impact that's likely to have on the delivery of the project. Are we looking at a later finish date? Because, you know, it is an urgent build, that one.
So the program was spread over the 2 years anyway. There will be I guess, an expected slight delay in deliverability. The main reason for the rephasing of that is a reflection of the current market in the long lead items, such as steel and timber and things like that, based on market advice.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then I've just got some questions about some of the programs in the, well, in fact, a bit of an anomaly between the consultation document and the supporting material. So this relates to Programme 1941, which is the library fines removal for youth and children, which, according to the supporting material, is starting in year 3, and so there's no budget for years 1 and year 2. But according to the consultation document, on page 46, although the total budget is correct, it indicates that it will be covering years 1 to 10. So, my question is, if we have in the consultation document said it's starting in year 1, but in the supporting material said it's starting in year 3, Where does that leave us on making a decision about that particular programme?
Looking around the room, and I can't find anybody more appropriate than... Oh, brilliant. Shannon will perhaps correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is the fines on the children's issues, is that correct, is from year one. And maybe I'll let Shannon answer. She's probably got a better understanding than me.
Yeah, but you see, there's nothing in year 1 and year 2 there. But here it says years 1 to 2.
A little bit of confusion, and you may have found an anomaly that needs correcting, but I believe it's the children's fines that have been removed, and that has been from year 1.
Okay. Well, then the supporting material then is incorrect?
I believe so, yes.
I haven't done a calculation, but if you add up the 8 years of the fines removal in the supporting material, I believe it comes to the 368 in the reduction operational revenue, and therefore does that budget line need adjusting?
Perhaps with your permission, we'll have a little gathering and we'll come up with a better answer.
Okay, but for now the answer is it's starting in year 1.
Let us confirm that.
All right, because if it's not starting in year 1, I will need to know by the end of the meeting.
We'll figure it out.
Thank you. And then my next question is a sort of a general question which will apply to quite a number of projects, which is, and I'll use this as an example, the children's skate park and the bowling green. We've had lots of requests in for new facilities, and most of them come with a feasibility plan before the facility is built, which is obviously sensible. My question is there any point in putting a feasibility in without following it with the budget? So, for example, let's take bowls. Is there any point in us agreeing to the feasibility for bowls if we haven't as well put the budget in for the bowling green? Do you see what I'm saying? But that applies not only to bowls, there's lots of things like that. I mean, yeah.
I see exactly what you're saying. I guess it depends on the outcome of the feasibility study, and so a little bit hard to determine what that may and may not look like, and so it's a conundrum with a difficult answer, I guess. The feasibility will give us more information on which to determine what the budget might be and whether a budget's actually required, and so there's no, I guess, right or wrong answer to this question. It's a political decision to some extent.
Okay, so if we do the feasibility for bowls, say, and it recommends that we go ahead and do the artificial covered turf, do we need to reconsult, or would that just come under an annual plan consultation type affair?
Yeah, two options. One is it's more likely to come under an annual plan consultation, and therefore it will be there. If it triggers the significance policy, so if we're talking really big dollars, then yes, we'd definitely have to reconsult at that point.
All right, thank you. And then my other question is around some answers that Councillor Dingwall and I were given about community funding. So it relates to the elected members Q&A document, but fundamentally, both Councillor Dingwall and I asked about strategic priority funding in strategic priority grant funding in previous years, including when it was fees for service. And so for the 18-19 year, we've been given two different figures for how much was spent. One figure is 1.241 million, and the other figure is 1.62 million. And I'm not sure which is correct. and I don't expect you to know off the top of your head, but maybe if we could have an answer in the course of the day. I'll just leave it at that for now, assuming that you don't know straight away what the answer is to that now. Okay.
Is it? Okay, thank you. Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you all for your presentation. My question is not a hard one. It's not a question about the figures. On attachment 3, last paragraph kind of recognizes the problem of footpaths and roading maintenance. But it says that the new contract will fix this problem. Was it really the case that only the contractor was the reason behind these problems, not the money? Because it says the new contract will fix these problems, or new contractor.
Through the chair, probably the best way for me to answer this is to say we didn't manage to spend our renewals money this year because the contractor was unavailable for some of the work we wanted to do. So whilst there might be a broader question of whether the overall fund is enough, certainly for this year, we have struggled to get the work that was actually in the programme delivered by the contractor at the time.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Thank you. Are we through your presentation? Great. And we've exhausted those questions for the moment. So, look, councillors, I'll just so we've got some idea of the order of how we'll go through things. As set out in the report, we'll take numbers 1 to 4, and then followed by 5.1, 5.2, followed by recommendations from elected members, and then finally recommendations from officers. The recommendations from yourselves have been circulated, and we've taken those as the large items first, i.e. over 100,000, and then via the 4 goals. So there's some fairness around how that is proposed. Everyone's going to be given a chance to speak. If you have any additional recommendations which have not been circulated, you must have a seconder before we entertain anything. I just want to remind everybody that there's not a lot of wriggle room here, so I appreciate everybody has a view to bring things forward, but it does need to get support. So all recommendations will be taken as separate motions, and then we'll acknowledge the substantive motion from there. So I've got just 2 questions to that process. Councillor Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, a process question. There were some questions that elected members had put up through the pre-process that have not yet been capable of being answered, and we were advised that those could be answered in the chamber today. So that will be a recommendation I was thinking of bringing forward, but I don't yet have the information to enable me to do that. How would we deal with that kind of situation?
Ask them right now.
You want to do that now?
Yeah, if they're pertaining to what we're going to debate and make some decisions on, you're probably best to get those questions out and answered now, rather than holding them back and then decisions are made and you haven't got the full information that you need.
Okay. So I do have a question, and it's an infrastructure question.
Okay.
And then questions to officers on the recommendations. Will officers be able to take those as we go?
Yes. So because we have some motions that have come through via submissions, yes, we'll and I've spoken with the GMs and the CEO, and that's how we'll run it. It's very hard to do that in one big block. So you're just going to have to be patient with some of that. All right?
Thank you. So I have a question, which probably Sarah... So there've been some questions raised through the elected member Q&A around the footpath on the southern side of Waka Kotahi Drive between Pacific Drive and Johnston Drive. And there was some confusion from my point of view, I'm sure not from yours, about the programme of work which is included, which is much larger than the specific question that I was seeking to raise. And I was looking for clarity around whether it was possible to separate out that particular piece of work, and if so, the cost and timeline for that. Thank you.
So, Councillor, just to clarify, because we brought forward and programmed this in this 10-year plan, which amalgamated a whole series of on-road cycleways, the cycleway, or the section of shared path cycleway between Johnson Drive, Pacific Drive, yes, was a separate project. The engineering work identified a multi-million-dollar solution, which was not affordable. The budget of $500,000 is insufficient to resolve, to deliver a solution in that particular area. So that project has been pushed for at least year 4 or 5 while we look at alternatives. And some of that will involve discussions with NZTA around changing the speed environment of that section of road, and enabling us to, take some of the carriageway potentially. So.
Thank you. Yep, that was my understanding from the information provided. But my question is, can we just do a footpath? Do we have to do the big shared pathway? Do we have to do the big project, or can we pull forward specifically a footpath, which was identified by the General Manager at the time in 2018 as a high priority issue? Can we do a footpath for that very small section?
You can, but you will then complicate the issue of providing for cyclists on that route. So you will then essentially have predetermined an on-road solution for cyclists, which is suboptimal given the speed environment, and so it would result in exposure for cyclists on that section.
Pretty suboptimal for the next 4 years anyway, I think.
Through the chair, can I just say, we could look at something more temporary,
yes,
because I'm aware of the area that you're talking about. So we'll discuss within the budget frame that we have whether there's a temporary solution there in the interim.
And would that need to come through this budget decision today? Are you talking about doing something within existing budgets?
I was thinking within existing budgets.
I would like some certainty around that before I don't put something
Okay,
forward.
well, that'll be something else that we'll convene about, but we should be able to get back to you during the course of today.
Thank you, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you, Mr Mayor, that's my questions.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. It's just an observation, actually, just in terms of the additional recommendations that was circulated. The recommendation in respect of the City Ambassadors Program is actually missing from Goal 3.
I'm getting some nodding heads. That will be circulated in a break. Okay. All right. We have 1 to 4, which we will go through. So 1 is around receiving the submissions, that the committee recommends that the submissions received on the consultation material for the proposed long-term plan, 10-year plan financial and infrastructure strategies, revenue and financing policy, development contributions policy, significance and engagement policy, and the proposed strategies for achieving Council's vision and goals be received. I'm going to look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments before we vote. There being none, we will vote. Has passed, 16 votes for, none against. The next one is around receiving the consultation document, where the committee recommends, number 2, that the report on PAMI 2021-31 consultation presented to the Committee of Council on 9th of June 2021, attachment 1, be received. Again, I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to say that I thought some good innovation was used in the consultation methods this time round, and it resulted in a substantially increased number of submissions. I think the wide variety of different methods by which people could put a submission in were helpful. The little postcards are obviously very popular. And I did note that compared to, say, the last 10-year plan, we did seem to get submissions from a wider range of people. There were many groups and individuals who submitted this time round who we haven't heard from before. And so I just thought that that was worth noting and commending, and hope that that continues in future.
Yes, good points, Councillor. I do think that we've gone where the people are rather than the people coming to us. Our sector groups, which are strong, our online community, which is strong, and actually different ways of communicating with us. I especially like the schools or that civics education, in a sense, that is starting to permutate from this organisation, and I think that's really, really healthy, and I think it shows the diversity and demographics of our city much better than just the traditional stick an ad in the paper, wait for the written reply or best email reply, and you get what you get. No, the officers have done a great job, and I think on pages 2 to 6 you can see the depth and breadth of that consultation, so well done. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I just wanted to echo those comments. I was really pleased with the report and the overview. It showed actually how thorough our engagement was. And I know in the lead up to signing off the draft, the consultation side of things was a particular concern, I think, for elected members around what that plan was going to look like. But it's really positive. As Councillor Johnson said, the diversity that's come through the submitters themselves has been really positive. And particularly, I think, the online engagement. Our comms team who deal with social media deserve a particular acknowledgement, because they were very creative in their engagement. They were engaging in their posts. They were light-hearted in some responses that needed to perhaps lighten the mood with some particularly strong feedback. And I see their engagement on social media, and it is very good. The Facebook Live that we did, we saw a number of other councils do that, and I know some of them were particularly in response to us doing it. So I thought it was really positive. It opened up a conversation for our community, and I think that, the outcomes are really positive, particularly when you go through and look at the breadth of actually what was within our comms plan. So, yeah, really happy with that report.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, great output this time round for consultation. I think we're all delighted to have got the numbers that we've got, and I particularly wanted to thank the officers who went where the people are, as the Mayor said, on those cold and windy mornings out on the streets and at markets, actually seeking to engage previously unengaged people. I think that was the right thing to do, and it wasn't always easy. And elected members were an active part of that, but it was very much officer-led, and I was grateful for the support that we had in that space, so thank you. I did want to draw attention to two things that I think went well this time but could go better next time. I was delighted with the impact of working with schools and having 4 high schools, I think, generate quite a lot of submissions. That was great, but the officers noted in the document that hit a problem with timing for school holidays, so that's to note for next time, that if we want to continue down this road, then we need to work proactively to get the material to schools at a time that works for them, not expect them to work around our timing. Which links into the second point I wanted to make, which is about, I suppose, pre-engagement rather than consultation. And we've seen that in neighbouring councils, where they've gone out for early consultation or pre-engagement with particularly their community sector before putting the draft plan together. And I think that is something that I would like to see us look at. I think it would enable us to not get into the situation we've been in this week of dealing with the community submissions, hearings, and then trying to gather information on those hearings in the space of a week to bring back to this decision-making process. So I think we've done an excellent job. I'm very pleased with the quality and quantity of the submissions that we've had, but there's always things we can do better.
Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to echo those comments and especially point out that the sector meeting, group meetings was very encouraging, and I think we see by the results of especially sports submissions that the process worked and worked well.
All right, councillors, just before we put it to the vote, look, part of consultation is getting all views, and I'm just reading some of the comments here. Warts and all, good and bad, informed and misinformed. But again, I just want to commend the communications and marketing team for a job well done. We've challenged you at times on doing better, and I think you have well and truly delivered, so thank you. Right, we'll put it to the vote. It has passed, 16 votes for and none against. Now, number 3. So it's receiving a summary of the submissions. So, councillors, it's this document, all 180 pages of it, and I will look to, the committee recommends, I'll look to move this, that the summary of, number 3, summary of submissions report presented to the Committee of Council on the 9th of June 2021, attachment 2, be received. I look for a seconder, the Deputy Mayor, thank you. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Johnson.
Just a quick comment that this was really an amazing turnaround, given the number of submissions we had and the number of people that spoke to us in the hearings. To have this document ready so quickly, I really appreciated it. It was very, very helpful, and you know, I just want to acknowledge that, because I think there must have been a lot of work going into that after hours and should be acknowledged. Thank you.
Yes, I totally agree, Councillor. You know what we all did ourselves, and this was extra on top of that. So just want to acknowledge Hayley and Andrew and the team and behind that have done the work around pulling all this together. I was emailing people, not at 1 o'clock in the morning, but at other times, and I was getting replies, which meant they were working. So I do, again, like consultation material, the officers have delivered again, so we appreciate that. Being no further comments, we will vote, please. That has passed, 16 votes for, none against. We now move to number 4, which is a summary of the 2021 resident survey, and I'll ask David who is going to do a short presentation on this.
Right. We weren't proposing to speak or present to that. It's just been received like the rest of the information. So.
Look, I just want to make the comment that I do believe this is worth the officers coming back, perhaps at a later time, to speak to it. There has been a shift in a positive manner, but actually it would be good just to tease out some of those findings. Perhaps today is doesn't need to be done today, and with such a full agenda, I'll just leave that to the CE and the officers to consider where that may come back to council. It's quite important that we know what our residents think, and it isn't just all the people online. Sometimes people do actually have some other views. So look, I'll look to move that number 4, the summary of the 2021 resident survey presented to the Committee of Council on 9th of June 2021, attachment 3, be received. Second by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for comments. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I did just want to make a quick comment on this because I agree that it's a piece of work that is probably a bit lost within our 10-year plan, we have had a really positive shift in the figures that have come out. So there's been an increase in satisfaction, increase in trust, which has actually increased 20%, which is really positive. And I remember particularly a piece of work that was done by local government, LGNZ, a few years ago, which talked about how we were quite far down the list in terms of entities that were trusted. And so that's really positive that residents are seeing that the value for money and the services that are delivered. There is obviously a bit of work still to do within infrastructure and moving around the city, but overall it is really positive, and I just wanted to make sure that we still do, I guess, single it out rather than just receiving it with everything else, because it is a positive shift that is a credit to the work that we are doing, the work that as an organisation, and also I think the branding and the identity and the value, conveying the value of local government to our community. So yeah, that deserves acknowledgement.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to raise one of the more unusual feedback that I've had with the submissions coming through around the Aquatic Centre. On page 72 of our order paper, it's got a public swimming pool survey that has increased and jumped to 79% satisfaction this year over previous years. And so it seems like an anomaly to think that the public think the pools are fine, but obviously the competitors are really feeling the demand. So one of those anomalies that I've kind of discovered. Thanks.
I think we're talking people swimming to competitive swimming. I think there's a difference there. Oh, look, I just want to acknowledge there has been a shift as well. I mean, footpaths, all of those, what I call basics, still have some work to do, our roading as well. But I just want to remind councillors, we are taking some of the state highway traffic right through the middle of our city. So to expect our roads just to be in good condition is perhaps we can't. So there is some work to do there, and we'll be working with the Transport Agency and our new contractors to better that as much as we possibly can. So look, we have the recommendation there. We'll look to vote, please. That has passed, 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, the next one, we'll just, before we break, we'll look to the Waka Kotahi NZTA and the three options. So we've got three options here, and this has been well outlined to us because of the reduction on expected income from the Transport Agency. So option one is to increase the rates to cover the shortfall of 1.19 million over 3 years. Option two is to maintain council's share of the costs for the proposed shortfall of 1.14 million, or option three, reduce the entire program to match NZTA's funding of 2.33 million over 3 years. Before we go to anything, I'll open it up for any comments. Any questions? Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I guess the question that I think would be still relevant to have the answer for is the impact of all of the changes that are outlined in Appendix 4 and 5, what the impact of that is on our overall capital spend for years 1, 2 and 3. That question was asked, and I understood that that answer was going to come back to us.
So what we've done is put the total capital spend on the board year by year. Now in the presentation, which should have been emailed to you already, that slide showed that there was a reduction in the overall capital spend in year one of $1 million, and in year two an increase of somewhere around 5 point something, and in year three a further increase. So these numbers are slightly less in year one, around 5 and a bit million more than what was in the plan in year two, and around, I think, about 11 million more than what was in the plan in year three.
Sorry, I hadn't seen the board behind me. But the other question is, which option was presumed to be the case when we looked the rates increases and the capital program that you've outlined? Is it based on option 1, 2 or 3?
In terms of the model put through, nothing's been done from that perspective, so it is the equivalent of option 2, which is I guess a full maintenance spend and a full subsidy. And so from a rates, bearing in mind most of this is operating in nature, from a rates perspective, we're really looking at option 2 as status quo from a rating perspective.
Thank you.
Councillor Beattie. All right, councillors. Oh, no, there is one more. Councillor Barton.
Just to remind, I know the thing is on the screen somewhere, but just to clarify, option 1 was an increase in rates of 0.4%. Option 2 is no impact on rates, it's cost neutral. Option 3, I'm assuming, is a reduction in rates of 0.4%.
That's absolutely correct, and the numbers on the board are 3-year numbers, so you know, for the sake of clarity, 1.19 divided by 3 is around 400,000, and bearing in mind, I guess for the rest of the day, the calculation's relatively simple. $1 million is 1%, $100,000 is 0.1%.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Stuart. That's exhausted the questions. Look, this is, my opinion is option 2 is where I think we should be heading, maintaining council's share of the cost. It's cost neutral. So I'm going to look to move that. Seconded by, thank you, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Bowen. And councillors, look, I think we're in a tight position here where we do need to maintain what we're doing in this transportation modes. But if we reduce, I think we are just kicking the can down the road. We're also challenged with our rate increase as well. So I don't think there's a lot of other options, in my opinion. So I would like you to consider supporting option 2, which is cost neutral, where council maintains its share of the costs for the proposed shortfall of 1.14 million. All right, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yep, obviously we'd have all have liked Waka Kotahi to front up with all of the money that we'd asked for, but this is what it is. And noting from submissions that our community are very keen for us to not just charge ratepayers all of the money. They like to see the money coming from somewhere else. Now, taxpayers and ratepayers might be the same person, but we can at least say in this space that we are seeking support financially from another avenue. I'm happy with option 2 because that is cost neutral. It's going out with the same quantum of money. We'll deliver maybe less, maybe differently, but I was encouraged by the officer's comment that they would use their professional judgment to get best value out of that spend and direct the funding that we have to where we'll get most benefit for our community, and I'm very confident that we can achieve that.
Councillor Harper.
Very happy to support option 2 and very happy with the officer's answer when she gave us that explanation as well. And I do think that our community is fully supportive of us maintaining our footpaths and our cycleways. I think they are very dear to our community's heart, and we do need to continue to maintain that for our community. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will not be supporting option 2. I prefer option 1 because option 2 is actually a reduction in level of service. And we've had many of our submissions come in wanting increased footpaths, maintenance, and from year to year, we haven't increased the budgets. This is our basics, this is our maintenance. So we're actually, by voting for option 2, you're actually voting to reduce our level of service, which is against you can shake your head, but it is reducing our level of service because we're taking, if Waka Kotahi do not come up with $1.19 million, we're actually, that won't get done on our roads. So you're reducing the level of service that we went out with in the plan. So I'm not supporting this. I want to increase our basics. We need more money spent on our footpaths, our cycling paths, and this reduces it. So I will put forward option 2 if this fails. Option 1 if option 2 fails.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. In my questioning of the officer about how this might fall, my understanding was that officers could certainly choose, if we went with option 2, to maintain spending on footpaths, that the cycle path that we consulted on wasn't already an increased level of service than what we provide currently. So my understanding of option 2 is that although we'll be spending 1.14 less because we won't be getting it from Waka Kotahi, that in terms of level of service, the cycle path level of service need not change, and we can maintain the level of service on footpaths. That was my understanding from questions. I don't know if anyone could give me a comment on whether that was a correct understanding.
That was mine as well.
I'm happy to comment. The proposed maintenance budgets that were, so assuming Waka Kotahi gave us our entire amount of funding, the proposed entire amount of funding was an increase, a reasonably significant increase on previous. And so the reduction of their funding has reduced that increase, but it's still an increase on what we've currently done.
Thank you, that was my understanding.
Thank you for the clarification. Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm also speaking in support of option 1. The reality is whether it is our footpaths, which we know are in a terrible state, or whether it's our roads, which we know are getting beaten up, the reality is we need more investment in the transport space. And it is frustrating to me that Waka Kotahi is in this position of coming back to us. There's a certain irony to me that the government has lots of money in the taps for water reform, but transport, well, cut. So I do ask what's going on from Wellington in terms of where the cuts are coming and where the money is flowing. Regardless, what we should not be doing is shortchanging our community, and what we need to do is continue to invest to support the getting through the maintenance backlog that we experience every single day in our transport network, whether it's the roads, whether it's the footpaths, whether it's the cycle lanes. So I'm very much opposed to cutting back by 1.19 million and would like to see us covering that shortfall. So I'll be voting against this on the hopes that we can get option 1 through.
All right, thank you, councillors. I'll just have the right to reply there. Look, option 2 is a balanced view on this. I think it's just, answers to questions this is not a reduction, although it is shifting around some budgets. It's not a reduction, and we just have to play with what we've got. There is lots of debate to come, and I believe that this is the best way forward. I take the views of increased level in cycleways already. We can tinker with the footpaths, and we've got a lot of submissions around improving footpaths, and really it's around, in fact I go back to one of the officers' comments, which was extra renewals and maintenance is achievable, new capital projects are doubtful. And I've got that note, and I'm just going to keep it there because that was a comment made right at the start. So be careful what we wish for. So option 2 is where I think we need to go. Ask you to support it, please. We will vote. And that is passed, 13 votes for and 3 against. Thank you. Right, councillors, we will have a a well-earned little break, and we'll be back in the chamber shortly. Thank you. We'll be back in at 10 to 11. Thank you. 5.1b and 5.1c, which is the carry forwards of capital and carry forwards of operating. The operating includes the ERP, IT system and Tamakuku Terraces subdivision. And we have already done the NZTA work. So look, I'll look to move those. And the committee recommends that the proposed capital carry forwards outlined in attachment 4 be included in the draft of the final 10-year plan 2021-2031, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. There being none, we will look to move. Thanks. And that is passed 14 votes for and 1 against. Thank you. We now move to 5.1d, which is around council decisions.
We need to do operating first. We just did capital.
Oh, my apologies. We missed the capital. So, again, I'll look to move this. That the committee recommends that the proposed operating carry forwards outlined in attachment 4 be included in the draft of the final 10-year plan, 2021-31. My apologies. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Again, I'll open it up for any comments. There being none, if you could vote, please. And it has passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we now move to 5.1d, which is around council decisions. That's on page 84, 85 and 86. I'm happy to move these. That the committee recommends that the proposed council decisions outlined in attachment 4 be included in the draft of the final 10-year plan 2021-2031, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Again, I will open that up for any comments. There being none, if you could vote, please. And that has passed 14 votes for with 1 against. Thank you. We now move to 5.1e, which is around budget corrections. I'll move these as a whole. It includes the iwi provision and the Kelvin Grove Community Centre car park, which were missed off some earlier documents. Again, the committee recommends, I'll look to move this, that the proposed budget changes as outlined in attachment 4 be included in the draft of the final 10-year plan, 2021-2031. I've moved it. Look, the Deputy Mayor has seconded it. I'll open it up for any comments. Being none, if you could vote, please. Passed 15 votes for and none against. We now move to 5.2 and we'll look to items 1 to 4 only, because item 5 will need to be considered after your motions as they are officer recommendations. So I'll move those as a whole. I'll break them down if necessary, but I think they can go together. I'm seeing nobody disagreeing. So the committee recommends that the amendments to the programs as outlined in attachment 5, items 1 to 4, be included in the draft of the final 10-year plan, 2021-2031. I've looked to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Again, I'll open it up for any comments, and there being none, we will look to vote, please. Okay, that has passed 14 votes for and 1 against. We'll just take a couple of moments break, please, while we just get some technical stuff fixed up. So during those last recommendations, we just have to separate out one around the DIA, the government's Three Waters funding, and just approve that. So that is just coming forward in a moment. All right, councillors, this extra recommendation is in your papers on page 85 and flows through to 86. It is the incorporating programs relating to the Three Waters funding, and that the proposed 10-year plan did not include the programs that were outlined to be funded through the government's DIA Three Waters subsidy. Budgets have been updated to incorporate these, and note that the additional 2021-22 sums listed below will be 100% funded through the government's DIA Three Waters subsidy. So we have a recommendation there which I'm happy to move, that the committee recommends 5.1F, that amendments to the programs as outlined in attachment 4, item 2.2, be included in the draft of the final 10-year plan 2021-2031. I will move that. I'm looking for the seconder, the Deputy Mayor. Thank you. I'll open it up if there are any comments to that. Only comment I'll make is we're grateful to the government for that subsidy work, and as you can see, it's gone into some much needed infrastructure, and I note that the people of Bunnythorpe should be happy because there's some money spent there as well. Right, we will vote. Councillor Bowen. Okay, that's 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, we now come to additional recommendations for for the LTP deliberations. And councillors, as I sort of started the meeting, we've positioned these at bigger items over 100,000, and then we work our way down through to the goals. And I'll start with Councillor Barrett. Your first one around program 159, Kelvin Road Safety Improvement 5 dips being moved from years 4 to 6 to years 2 to 4 in the LTP. I'll allow you to speak to this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, thank you to Councillor Petranis for supporting, seconding this. Those of you that looked through the submissions were in the hearings. Obviously, this is something that we heard a lot of feedback on, and no surprise, because we do every single time we go out to the community. This is a well-known bit of dangerous road that we've been getting clear messages on for quite a long time, from residents who've seen accidents and from road users who have suffered misadventure there. If you look at the history of this, in the 2015 long-term plan, we'd be done. And then in the 2018 long-term plan, it started slipping. And what we can see in the 2021 long-term plan proposal is that it's now slipping away again into year 4 and the never, never. My concern is that the community deserves better in terms of road safety, especially in well-known areas of concern such as this, and that if we wait for Waka Kotahi to come to the party, what that will take is actual harm caused. So we are unlikely to attract that co-funding until there have been enough serious accidents, or hopefully not, but fatalities in that stretch of road to justify in their model actually spending the money that we know needs spending to improve the safety outcomes for this road. So the basic point of this proposal and recommendation for you today is for us to be more responsive to community concerns about road safety. This is a well-known example. That bit of road is a disaster waiting to happen. We can get in front of it with a funding choice here that puts work into this current phase of the long-term plan starting in year 2 to solve the concerns for that community. So I'd urge you to support this.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I go to the questions that are lining up, can I just go to the officers? Does this, if this does come forward, does it attract Waka Kotahi NZTA funding either from the FAR rate or the safety improvements? Knowing that the safety improvements is pretty minimal.
As the funding is currently outside of the current RLTP period, because it's occurring in year 4, it's not confirmed. So there's, given the constraints on budgets, we would expect that Waka Kotahi would ask us to displace something within our program to make room for this. So unlikely it will get funding if brought forward into the current RLTP.
Could I ask how much the value of the work is?
It's 600,000 in 24-25, 725-26, and 5.1 million in 26-27. So it's 6.5 million.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll open up for questions. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's comments, isn't
Sorry,
it?
sorry, comments. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, totally agree with Councillor Barrett on this. This has come up several hundred times at the Bunnythorpe community meetings. And the other thing too that I think we've got to consider is, I mean, when you look at those figures, you're looking at sort of, you know, over $5 million. Well, if you push it out to another 2 or 3 years past that, then it's going to be another 20%. So by the time we do go to get it, it's going to be about $8 million. The other thing too is that the growth out in those areas is humongous with Tamakuku and Whakaronga and Kelvin Grove. I mean, Council has said it, it's a disaster waiting to happen if we don't.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I totally agree with this. I think we've heard this since I've been on council for the last 3 terms, so I think this is one that we do need to support. We do need to bring it forward to years 2 to 4. I'm not sure if it would attract funding if it was in years 2 to 4. I'm not sure if that was the question that was asked to the officer, but I do think this community, in terms of Kelvin Grove and Bunnythorpe, it does need a win, and I think that this is one that it could get a win for. So I do think that this could be one that we could look at, and we could see it happen for this area. I do think it's one that, for safety concerns, this is one that we really should be supporting. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think bringing this forward is definitely worthy of our consideration, and I guess that the issue that I have with this, along with some of the other items that we'll need to consider today, is that the question I ask myself, is it realistic and is it responsible to plan to deliver more programs than we can realistically deliver or fund? And that's where I run into trouble, really, in terms of my own decision-making process. I would happily bring this forward if there was another program that we're currently planning to fund, if that was deferred in terms of like a substitution sort of arrangement. If this is so important that we need to bring it forward, I think something else needs to be reprioritised. So as it stands alone, I wouldn't support it. But if there was some other program that we're currently doing in the years 2 to 4 period that we could defer, then it would certainly have my support.
Can I just confirm that from the officers, because I think that's quite a worthy question/comment. If this was to succeed, would it be extra, or would we just look to reprioritise some of the existing work? Bearing in mind, year 2 I think was 600,000, year 3 was 700,000, and year 4 was the 5 million.
Through the chair, I'm staying here so that Robert can join in when he feels ready. Through the chair, those first 2 years of lower costs are presumably the design and consenting. If they landed in years 2 and 3, that would be just over $1 million, where we'd have to move something else. The major construction cost, if that moved to year 4, that's in Waka Kotahi's new envelope, not the envelope they've just given us. So we wouldn't know yet whether that's fundable or not. So the potential for change would be around the $1 million mark, just over.
Okay.
Sorry, just some clarification. So the first and second years, so this is year 4 and 5, those expenditures are around delivering safety improvements at 2 intersections. One is, they're not just design. So there's one is Stony Creek Road and Hennigan's Road, and the other is Kairanga Bunnythorpe and Stony Creek Road. So they're in that region. So they're about safety improvements, and then they're followed by the major realignment and I mean, the cost is around changing the geometry of the road. So getting rid of the dips, very big cuts, very big fills. So land acquisition, it's a complex project, difficult to deliver. I think there will be real questions about whether it could be delivered a lot earlier, but it will not attract NZTA subsidy if it moves into the current 3-year period. If you want to do, even if they want to do those safety treatments, they would have to displace other projects which are considered to be higher priority and have been signed off by NZTA. So that's the other thing to remember. We would have to go back through the approval process. So I think you're looking at having to do 100% funding of this project if you wanted to proceed with it.
So can I just ask the question? Bearing in mind, I think it's in the top accident areas, certainly in the region and in the top list of the country, why would it not attract some funding? That I get the moving of the 1 million, and that's a political decision whether we want to fund that ourselves. But the 5 million that you talk about, which is the bulk of the work, surely that would go back into the consideration of safety and Waka Kotahi FAR funding.
Through the chair, what the councillors proposed is for that 5 million to be in year 4, which is outside of the Waka Kotahi current envelope. So to confirm, we're only talking about the first 3 years. Right. With the proposal, so not the 5 million geometric.
Okay, and that would be a later decision
we wouldn't know whether they.
And you don't know, but I've been around this game long enough to know that it probably would get some sort of assistance, yeah. I know you can't say that. Councillor Dennison. Councillor Johnson.
Just to say that I do support this coming forward, because the junction improvements for the 2 junctions that the officer mentioned have been needing doing, well, all the time that I've lived here anyway. In particular, if you're coming down Stony Creek Road trying to cross that road or turn right, there's no visibility to the left whatsoever, and it's been the scene of quite a number of accidents. So I think Councillor Barrett is correct that unless we, determine unless we become more determined to actually get this done, it will just end up being pushed off every year. And it's been hovering around for long enough and it deserves to be done. And I think the fact that the bulk of the funding falls outside the current Waka Kotahi envelope is an advantage to us, because we could ask for the funding in the next round. So I would support the 600 and 700 being funded even by us, because I think that those are really necessary improvements to those junctions.
Before I go back to you, Councillor, I'll just comment, because mine have been questions to this date. Look, I'm going to support this as well. I just needed to tease out where the money actually sat. So as we've heard, the first 2 years are possibly us, although I will ask the officers to go back and talk to the agency about what can be done or what can be swapped. But that is the lesser part of the equation. Councillor Johnson's right. If you can remember some other programs that we've had consistently come to us, Forest Hill Road was another one. I don't know how many times those poor people had to front here, since I've been on council anyway, and I believed it was long before I arrived. This is in a similar vein. Unfortunately, there's extra traffic there now from our TA neighbours consenting another village at Huanui, effectively, which basically travels into the city each day along that road. And we've got state highway traffic, which is taking that road as well. So there is, and I don't want to tempt fate, but there is accidents waiting to happen. Do we feel good about that? No. So what can we do about it? So at least starting the process sooner is in some way replying to the submissions in some order of good faith. So I ask you to support it, what the councillors have put up, and years 2 and 3 are effectively small. The big one is year 4, and we've got a real opportunity to go back and talk to the Transport Agency, who I understand have safety top of mind these days, about backing that with a decent fare rate. Back to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Only to thank colleagues for teasing out the detail around the timing of that funding and how that sits. I think that can give us a greater level of comfort that a yes vote here is the right way to respond to the community's concerns.
All right. We will now vote on it, please. That is 15 votes for and 1 against. Right, we move to number 2, and this is around a result of public consultation. B, that program 990, the Arena Southern Grandstand, be removed from years 3 to 6 to years 6 to 9 of the LTP. Back to you, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, this is indeed in response to submissions received, which did specifically support changing and, in fact, moving this investment out to years, subsequent years. The basic rationale around this for me is that we really just need to get our priorities right around sports and recreation in this city. And if you look at the overwhelming theme that came through the submissions process, it was around play space, it was around turf space, it was around lane space. People need facilities that they can use. What we didn't hear was massive signals about spectator space. We've already invested a fair bit into the CET arena. And to my view, hearing those submissions, the best next spend that we can be making in the sport and recreation space is around facilities for play. And we need to be giving ourselves the investment headroom to be doing that. So this recommendation still keeps the Southern Grandstand on the agenda. It just creates some space in the earlier years for us to invest in ways that respond to what we've heard from submitters. So I'd urge you to support it on that basis.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'm happy to also second and support this, moving this program out. I think the submissions, in particular the submission from Sport Manawatu, did raise the issue to ask us to consider the opportunity cost as well in bringing in the timing of this program as it currently set in the draft plan, and urged us to that the regional sports facility plan should determine the timing to proceed. And I think given the multiple demands on other sports codes, I do think we need to ensure that we have a really appropriate framework to help us to prioritise and determine what things we do fund. And at the moment, I don't think we have a clear case for that being in the timing, included in the timing that it currently sits. As well as that, as I've mentioned, you know, there's a lot of consideration that we'll have in front of us with in the deliberations to be bringing programs forward and adding programs in. There's very little in here that actually require us to consider deferring or taking programs out. We have a huge bubble of expenditure in years 3 to 6 already, and to the point that we can't even fund those programs. So I think there's a lot of good reasons why we need to push things out and ensure that we have a responsible and fundable plan.
I'm going to comment. I know the mover and the seconder have never been fans of our arena facility, but actually there was
Mr. Chair, I think you've misrepresented comments that elected members have made, and I don't believe that's a fair comment, and I'd ask you to please withdraw it.
Okay, I'll withdraw it. You have voted against arena in the past. This is a program which has been through multiple LTPs. It's actually been through the regional facilities fund and has had a feasibility plan. Sport Manawatu have asked for it to be rechecked, and absolutely you should do that with any big project. It's had some submissions against it, but it's had 3 times the amount for it. And like any program, we know that we can put multiple submissions towards programs if there's a bit of prodding in the background. Look, I think other factors too. This is done, it's gone through its checks and balances. There was some word there that it needs to go through frameworks. I would say it has, and it probably needs to go through some more. But to absolutely push it out to year 6 to year 9, I think you're probably saying, look, we'll kick the can down the road for this one. It is 2/3 externally funded, so you're basically saying to anybody that would be looking at funding this, we don't believe in it, so maybe you don't need to as well. So, councillors, it's a nice one, it's a target. I would ask that you keep it in the plan. It's still got to go through lots of rigour. It's not over the line by any means. I take on board the affordability. The other facilities absolutely need to go through the same level of scrutiny. There's stages. They need to go through the regional facilities plan for the needs assessment. 2 submitters on this represented over 8,000 members. That is just 2 submitters. Do they put in individual submissions? So I strongly think this might be misrepresented. Please don't support it. It's a target. It has to go through the rigour, and we will revisit this again if it survives this one. Councillor Hapera.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I fully do not agree with this submission, with this recommendation. Reason is that it's got momentum, and I think that putting it off to years 6 to 9 would mean that it would lose the momentum that it's got already. So by having it in years 3 to 6, it means that the fundraising can start to kick in, which is what it needs to do, because it is going to be externally fundraised, and that it's up to the Chief Executive to get that externally fundraising going for the grandstand, which is what it needs to happen. So I do think it will be a jewel in the crown for the arena, and that's what we need to see. We need to see a fantastic facility going at the arena with this new grandstand. So I do think kicking it out to years 6 to 9 is not the right way to go for the arena. We need to see it up and running. We need to see the actual momentum and the star factor happen. And by kicking it out to 6 to 9, it's not the right thing to do. So I really want to see this is not the right recommendation to push down the track. So please vote against it.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Along the lines of your comments opposing this move to push it out into latter years, sport is a big contributor to the vibrancy, but also the indirect economic benefit that we enjoy as a city. We've put in a lead infrastructure around the entranceway plaza and bridge, knowing that the Working Party have been working on a larger master plan for continued investment to continue to bring that significant asset to maintain its position in New Zealand's offering. The pushing it out, I agree, it starts to give an indication that is against the wider expectations that have been expressed over a number of years. Maybe not so strongly in this year because it's been included, where if it was excluded, I believe we would have had a ton of submissions advocating for its inclusion in its current placing. So it's around expectations, and I think the community are quite clear that we want to continue to invest in arena. If we start to push it out, I think there'll be a backlash from those that have got commitments to continue to contribute to it, without repeating the Mayor's comments or Councillor Hapera, I'm opposed to this recommendation to push out further.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support at least one statement by Councillor Dennison that sports is a big thing in the city. And I haven't heard ever that the arena was, or the stadium was sold out and people were looking for places during any of the games or any of the events. So we have recently upgraded the facility. I mean, as far as sports or the grounds are concerned, they are up to date. We are not opposing anything providing the facilities to the players or the games themselves. The reason we are supporting this is we don't want that to spend money somewhere where we are looking empty seats during games and the other places where really investment is required, we are ignoring that. Who knows that if you spend this money on a covered pool or 50 meters long pool, who knows that you get submissions for making grandstands on those facilities, not on these ones. So we are not opposing sports events. We are asking to, or I am supporting that the money should be spent intelligently where it is required. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I find this one a little bit tricky because I think to use the phrase from the mover in a previous item, what's proposed seems to be putting this into Never Never Land as we sort of look at our long-term plan in terms of the actions that are actually going to be completed in the next 3 years. And when it comes to decision-making for the long-term plan, we really are quite siloed with our decision-making. We're making decisions based on the current draft and the current submissions. And so for an item like this, we're not taking into account the Arena Master Plan consultation, previous long-term plans, I guess the fact that deferring the timeframe was not even consulted on. And so in terms of, I think Councillor Dennison mentioned it, is if that had been proposed, then the response to submissions may have been quite different. I have got a level of comfort with the current timeframe because it is not immediately to be done. And as the Mayor mentioned, there's still works and work and checks and balances that needs to be done before the proposal would actually be signed off for a build, for funding arrangements, with it looking to be 2/3 externally funded. So whilst I appreciate the intention around looking at where we're spending, I think that actually we haven't got a fair representation of submissions from the community with their voice in this conversation. As we've seen through other pieces of work that we've done, I think actually Councillor Bowen talked about it through our LAP, do we expect submitters, once they've made a comment on something in particular, do we expect them to then submit? Because I think from their perspective, they feel that they've shared their perspective, they've had their say. And so when I'm thinking about a decision like this, I'm thinking about the huge amount of support that did come through, and some of the parts that I didn't actually support, but that did come for the Arena Master Plan as a whole, and particularly an expansion of, in this case, spectator space. So I'm not going to support this at this stage, and I'm comfortable that with it being in year 3, the work starting, that actually we've still got time to be looking at doing the checks and balances around that piece of work.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councillor Harpiter when she says that the arena has received a lot of momentum over the last few years. It has received a lot of momentum over the last few years, and I feel like now might be the time for us to focus some of that energy on some other areas. Is that a 50-metre pool? I don't know. But we won't be able to achieve all of the other things that is needed in sports if we keep focusing solely on the arena. And so I do support moving this out to years 6 to 9 so that we can create a bit of space to look at other projects that people have actually submitted on in the last couple of weeks to this council. The arena is not the end-all and be-all of economic development. Yes, it does bring in some economic development, but it turns out so does swimming tournaments, so does, some other events that happen around the city. And I think we do need to be careful about just how much focus goes into that one area. And I think for me, it's not saying we won't do it, it's just saying that maybe this year, when we've got quite a lot of things on our plate, that is not the highest priority that we could have.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't support this. I think we need to leave it where it is. As we've said, it has 2/3 funding, and who knows how much more funding we can get for it. It's not over the line yet. It's not finalised. So I think all the points that have been made around supporting it staying where it is, I think we need to back at this stage. Sport is a big contributor to our city, and what's wrong with us aiming to be the sports hub?
Councillor Mickelard.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will be just expressing that I will not be supporting this, as we can also see that sports is a major contributor to our local economy. And if we want to be a vibrant city, and we want to be a city that actually welcomes major sporting events into the city and bringing money or pumping money into our local economy, we do need a world-class facility to hold those events. And the reason why we're not be able to host a lot of these world-class events is because we do not have quality facilities to host them, for example. And we need to continue to invest in the development of this arena. And I currently agree with Councillor Harpiter as well in what she mentioned earlier. And I do feel like we are going to slow down the momentum, personally, if we are to move it from years 3 to 6 to years 6 to 9. So I will not be supporting this recommendation or amendment from that perspective. Thank you.
Right, back to you, Councillor Barrett. Right reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for the perspectives shared. I think when we started out on this journey months ago, prioritization was the first word out of the Mayor's mouth. And rightly so, because there are decisions to be made, and here we have a very clear choice for us around whether we're going to prioritize a grandstand, which might be full a couple times a year, versus lane space, court space, turf space that will be used every day by members of our community.
All right, councillors, if you could vote, please. That has failed. 5 votes for and 11 against. Right, we move to the next one, which was withdrawn. It was around a feasibility study around aquatic from Councillor Beattie. So we now come down to deferring the Bonsai Shade House and the Avery's upgrade. This is from myself and the Deputy Mayor. So I'll speak to that very briefly. As a result of public consultation, that the Bonsai Shade House and Avery's upgrade be deferred to year 4 of the 10-year plan. And councillors, pretty well where we just were before about making some priority decisions. But the main thing around this is I think it's lost a bit of community buy-in, and I heard your voices around our last debate around this, and in the bonsai especially, where the Japanese community have been quite silent about it in recent years, and I believe that we do need to get that community buy-in back in. The same with the Averys. If you look at other cities around New Zealand, indeed the world, there are lots of organisations, whether they're animal or plant or horticultural organisations, that will get in behind this. And I do believe that we haven't tested the water there yet. An example is Dunedin's Botanical Gardens, and indeed Christchurch's Botanical Gardens, where they have got significant groups that are supporting these sorts of projects. So I believe they need to be pushed out to year 4. I've got another recommendation a little bit later about where we can perhaps help shape those. But again, both of them are not time restrictive, so I believe that they can go to year 4. We're sweating the assets a bit, but we can get through. So I'll open it up for any other comments. Councillor Johnson.
It's just a question, really, at this stage. It's 2 questions, I suppose. The Bonsai Shade House, is that not a separate project to the Avery's upgrade? Have you got the programme
they're both
numbers?
separate projects.
They're both, yeah. Are you able to just give me the programme number so I can check them? Or someone can give me them in a minute.
Yeah.
I've got a second question, which is around the Avery's upgrade. So I'm aware that the Avery's upgrade was triggered by concern about the welfare of the birds in the aviaries. We're talking the exotic aviaries here. And I'm just a little bit concerned about the implications of deferring that upgrade if we don't feel we've got a good environment for the birds currently. And I'd quite like an officer comment on that.
Yeah, sure. My understanding is that, here we go, that they have been altered to accommodate that, but they're not, I'll let the officers speak to it.
That is correct. All the work will be completed early next year for the remedial work on the current existing aviaries to ensure that they're suitable to house our existing collection of birds. The aviary upgrade is for new aviaries.
And do we have the programme numbers for those, or if you could give me the page in the...
My apologies, I did ask for them. 1838 is the aviaries, and Bonsai House is 1127. Right, any other questions there, Councillor? We can come back to you if you've got others. Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, just a couple of questions from me also. Earlier today, we approved the changes that are outlined, and one of those is on page 96, programs seeking revised funding due to reassessment of timing, and one of those was one of these programs, the Victoria Esplanade Exotic Aviaries, and there was an increase from 814 to 1.3 million. And so that decision has already been confirmed today. If we are to change that, which is what's proposed in this recommendation, what would our process be? Would that require a 75%?
Can you just point to where we've made...
It's the third line down on page 96. It's the third program, the second program down on page 96 under program seeking revised funding provision due to reassessment of the timing. And that's been put into year 1 and 3 at a bigger amount than what was outlined in our draft, and increased from 814,000 to 1.333 million.
So my reading of that is not relitigating the decision that's already been made. The decision being made is around the budget total. Now you're talking about the timing, which is a new decision, and I think is okay as normal.
Okay, that's good. Thanks for that. And just the further question I have is that the 880,000 budget to be considered that was referred from the committee around the bonsai house and shade house. If we are to approve this recommendation, does that remove that additional funding, or does it just push the... Because I don't think we've yet made a decision on the 880,000 additional funding. So I guess what I'd like is to seek some clarity that if we support this recommendation, what is the decision around the 880? Is it taken out? Is it included in? Or what?
Sorry, technically right now what you're deciding on is the timing. There is further resolutions, I believe, I'm just looking at Hannah to ensure that, around the value, and so it's a similar question to your previous one. As this resolution stands, you're talking about the timing of the bonsai house. There'll be a separate decision around the value.
You've actually seconded, moved one yourself.
Yeah, I realise that, and that's why I'm trying to make an informed decision on the one that's come before it.
Which your one's coming next.
Yeah, but I still have to decide how to vote on this one first.
I think the officers explained what you're deciding on. It's whether you push it out to year 4 or you don't.
Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to you, if I might, actually. Just trying to understand from your view, the necessity to consider both of these in tandem. I suppose I see them as quite separate things, and especially around the aviaries. While perhaps the remedial work's been done to address the most desperate stuff, I still think they're quite a crude facility, and just wondering why we need to look at pushing both of them out versus one or the other. Because
they're both over budget, and both of them, I believe, can be more community-led and externally fundraised as well, that we haven't tested any of that. The officers, it's solely ratepayer funded at this stage, and to push them out to year 4 buys some time, enables the master plan to, and I hope some form of steering group to drive it. At this stage, it's 100% ratepayer funded, and we've already seen costs balloon. I would like to take a check on that.
Thank you.
All right, councillors. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just ask for your recommendation to be taken in 2 parts, one around the bonsai house and one separate for the aviaries?
Yep, that's fine.
That'd be okay? Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Just to make a brief comment that I support this recommendation.
All right, we're going to separate them. We'll just give staff a little bit of time to do that. We'll do the bonsai house one first. Sorry, we were just sorting out orders. So bonsai, we're going to vote on that one first. That has passed 14 votes for and 2 against. And we'll do the second part, which is the Averys to be deferred. Okay. And that has passed 11 votes for and 5 against. Right, we'll go to our next one, and on the same subject, that the additional, as a result of public consultation, the additional 880,000 budget for the bonsai shade house is removed and that this project is accommodated within reprioritised master plan budgets. Councillor Naylor, if you'd like to speak to that.
Just before I move that, Mr Mayor, could I please adjust that recommendation to delete the second half of it from the comma? So I'd like to move that the additional 880,000 budget for the bonsai shade house is removed.
In total, so there's no budget for it at all.
Yep. So I think, just to speak to it, I think as the Mayor pointed out in the previous discussion, this is something that hasn't had good community buy-in. I don't believe it's a priority. I'm quite comfortable to not have that additional budget in as a part of our plan, which I think is already bursting at the seams. So I'm quite happy for that additional budget to not be included.
So, Councillor, could I just ask a question? We're talking additional budget.
So the recommendation from the committee that we haven't considered yet, for it to be considered as a part of these deliberations, what I'm proposing here is that it's not included. So if that's a better way to word it, then I'm happy with that.
Okay. I'm still not clear, but anyway. Councillor Johnson.
I've got a question, if that's okay. If this is removed, we've still got to do something with the shade house, and it's not clear to me from this what that something would be or where the budget would be for that. So I suppose it's a question to the mover as to how we would then deal with the dilapidated shade house.
So my view is that the previous recommendation has deferred the budget for the bonsai shade house and the Averys to year 4. So I think we've got plenty of time to consider whether that's a priority, whether other programs are reprioritised to accommodate that, or in the next long-term plan, whether there is additional budget included. But at this point, I don't believe we need to include an additional budget to accommodate that. It's not happening till year 4 anyway.
So if I might make a comment. As members will remember, I didn't support the larger budget for the bonsai house and the shade house in the previous committee meeting. But I also don't support no money for it at all, because we still have a shade house that needs renewal. And whilst I would be happy to support, I think it was the budget of around about 530,000 from memory. It was 530, yeah, for the renewal of the shade house and accommodation of the bonsai within that space rather than a totally new bonsai house. I also can't support this recommendation because I think it leaves us high and dry with nothing at all for the shade house. So it's a bit of a tricky one for me, but I can't support this as is. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, I'm wondering if we could seek an officer comment for clarification. My understanding is there was the original budget as proposed that's still in. This was an additional budget. So I wonder if officers could clarify what the budget is and where it is.
Okay, I'll ask Kathy to speak to this.
Councillors, this came to a committee because there is no budget in your draft long-term plan for this project going forward. There's a current year budget which was insufficient to complete the project, so we came to committee seeking direction for including some funding in the long-term plan. So at the moment there is no funding for either the bonsai house or the renewal work on the shade house. We have incurred some costs to date, and we have a potential amount of money that could be used as a carry forward, but no decisions have been made around that.
Thank you. If I could just follow up, Mr Mayor, to say, Kathy, what would be the impact if we took the additional budget away? So we have the recommendation that it's in year 4, but there's no budget, which would be the impact of this. What would happen then? How would a budget be established?
I just get clarification. Are you talking about the bonsai, the shade, or both parts of the combined project as
bonsai and shade?
So the only way you would establish a budget then would be through an annual plan process. So we sought for this a decision of council on timing and the amount.
Perhaps I can help a little bit, and I understand the question, although I'm a little bit concerned now that we've got ourselves in a slight pickle. Because right now we've made a decision about timing, but we have not actually got a program in the plan.
Yeah.
So
it'll be teased out.
So and I appreciate that. I just wanted to make that clear so that we're all on the same page. Now, if this resolution stays as is, that the funding be removed, you're stuck with a program with no funds at all. We would need another resolution now to put some funds into
It'll be coming, I'm sure.
Okay.
My concern with that is you're then debating a decision that's already been made and whether that runs us into trouble or not. Perhaps we would create a resolution could be that you're just talking about the shade house with some bonsai access rather than a bonsai house, in which case it's a new program. And I think that's probably the most pragmatic way of dealing with it. So suggesting a new program through a resolution for the work that you're recommending. Does that make sense?
Thank you. So thank you for allowing those questions, Mr Mayor, to comment. So this is a result of separate trains of thought coming forward and coming together at this point. So it needs some teasing out as to how it would work. I think as things stand, I'd be voting not to remove the budget because I can't see the logic of having a programme and no budget. Whether that budget is right or wrong, we can work on that later, but thank you to the officers for providing that clarification.
Councillor Johnson.
Just to indicate that if this should fail, I'm happy to move that we put 530,000 in the budget for the renewal of the shade house with the bonsai, and Councillor Dennison has indicated that he'll second.
Councillor Dennison. Yep. Confirmed. Okay. Councillor Harpiter.
I was going to say the same thing.
Okay. All right. That's exhausted. Comments back to you as right of reply.
I do have a further question, Mr Mayor, just for clarification. In the previous discussion, officers outlined program 1127 being the bonsai shade house. So I'm just wanting to know, because my understanding was that there were existing budgets, and what I'm talking about is the additional budget. So what is program 1127 and how much exists in that budget?
So Kathy may correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was $240,000 was in the current year to do this work. And that program number is not carried through to the 10-year plan.
Okay, so really just to speak to this, what I'm seeking to do perhaps removed is not the right, the best wording. What I was seeking to do was for that additional budget that it be not be included. So I suppose it's probably too late in the piece to change that. But really to say, what I'm suggesting is that we look at the existing budgets and look at potentially reprioritising other Esplanade budgets to accommodate, to determine priorities rather than lumping an additional 880,000 on top of the existing budgets.
All right, councillors, we will vote on this, please. Okay, that is failed, 5 votes for and 11 against. Now, there was an additional...
So in that case, may I move that budget of 530,000 be established for the bonsai and shade house in the current 10-year plan? And I think it will go into year 4 as per the previous recommendation. But,
So that's moved by yourself, Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Dennison. We'll just give the officers a couple of moments to pull that up.
and I just seek officer confirmation that that's the correct process for this.
Yes, we're getting nodding heads.
Thank you.
Appreciate we needed to tease that out. I think we sort of got to where we were sort of all wanting to get to there. All right, we're going to get it up. Okay, that we have a budget of 530,000 be included in the 10-year plan for the bonsai house and shade house in year 4. That's moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Dennison. Back to you, Councillor Johnson. Do you want to speak to this?
Well, just briefly, I know this has been a little bit confusing process, but ultimately there is no budget in the 10-year plan for this unless we put it in today. And that's what the referral of the programme from the previous week's committee to this 10-year plan was about. And so I support it being in year 4. We've already made the decision on that, but I don't support a kind of very grand $880,000 budget for this. I see the value of the shade house, and I understand that that needs renewing, and I see the value of the bonsai that we've been gifted, and I understand they need somewhere to be, but I don't think it needs to be an $880,000 budget for that. So from the previous committee, we were told that a budget of 530,000 would renew the shade house on the same footprint and provide a place for the bonsai. And so that's what I'm intending would happen as a result of this.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I read the room and I understood your comments, and I agree with the councillors moving and seconding this. We need a budget. 530 is still quite significant for what we're trying to do here, remembering that there's an opportunity to externally raise money as well. And it is in year 4, and I hope that the community gets in behind this and that we can turn that 530 into something more and plan something quite suitable for what we're trying to do. So I will look to support it. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I won't be supporting this budget, and my reason for that is that I think it's premature for us to agree in principle for something I don't believe has got enough community buy-in to add additional $500,000 into what is already an unaffordable financial plan. I think being in year 4 does give us some time to consider whether we want to include that in our next long-term plan, but I see no reason why we need to make that decision today. And making this decision today is giving a direction, a course of travel. It's agreeing in principle that we think that sort of money should be spent on a bonsai house, and I certainly don't think we've got enough certainty or buy-in from the community to make that decision now, so I won't be supporting it.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm supportive of the timing of this because I agree with the comments Councillor Naylor just made around community buy-in and support, and I don't actually think that we have a lot of that at present. So looking at year 4, which we've already made the decision on, gives us time to look at actually what our options are. I am supportive of any work that needs to be done on the shade house to maintain that and keep that going. But I think we are kidding ourselves by putting in a $530,000 budget, which is based on officer recommendations this year, at this point in time, for 4 years away, when costs are just going to be significantly higher, and it's going to come back to us with an increased budget saying, yep, 530k was great for 2021, but not 4 years down the track, and then we are going to have this fabulous article in the media saying that there's been cost blowouts and that we can't budget, and we're just going to put ourselves back in the position that we've been in recently. So I'm not going to support the budget because actually I don't think it's reflective of what any forecasting around where the climate's going to be in year 4.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First, to follow up the comments just made, I absolutely agree. We all know that that budget will be meaningless in 4 years' time. But I think what I took from Councillor Johnson's comments is that budget number is indicative of the scope of the project. It's the project that was costed at 530 in 2021. And I wonder whether that wording might need to be tweaked to capture that as the actual intent, that 530 is just a shorthand for the proposal that came through committee. I think we all understand that here and now, but we're causing a potential problem in 3 years' time. And my second, it might be a question, was that when we discussed this in committee, there was an indication that external funding might be available to this project. And I wondered if that also needed to be captured in this recommendation, that the CE would seek external funding towards this, or whether that is something that will automatically happen. Officers indicating a response.
My recollection of the report suggested that external funding is definitely available on the 880 full blown version, but because the display of the bonsais would be so reduced in this option, it was less likely to attract external funding. So I believe that's where we let it lie. If I may, through the chair, just make a brief response to Councillor Rutherford's comments as well. While I appreciate the sentiment, the logic, I guess, around using today's dollars and inflating it is the same across the entire plan, and so this isn't any different to any other program from that perspective.
So can you clarify, sorry Stuart, do we need to specify that we will look at external funding? Or?
So perhaps my advice would be that you don't necessarily include a dollar figure for external funding in this. However, I'd be comfortable with adding a line saying seeking external funding if possible or something.
So I would ask the mover if they'd be willing to include that in the recommendation, or I'll move it in as amendment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to add a line in Year 4, and that external funding be sought.
Thank you. Very happy with that, and therefore very happy to support the recommendation in front of us.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be supporting this. I suppose the thing that I wanted to comment on is that this puts us in a position of, I think, at least 7 years, if not a decade, of pretty much invisibility of these plants, all on the want of some house that has to be built. We have a library, we have a museum, we have a council building. Why can't we cycle these plants through some of those spaces in the meantime so that actually we activate those spaces better and we get these plants out where they can be seen? They are living treasures. They should be seen. And so my frustration, I suppose, with how this is going is that we're just kicking the can down the road, and I can understand the rationales there, but let's do something in the meantime.
Councillor Beattie?
Thank you.
They're your bonsais. Yeah.
Well, of course I support this budget, so I mean, no further comment, but I'd just like to say I don't want to see my bonsais recycled round buildings where I already know that started and one has died. So it wasn't one of the good ones, so that's all right. But I'm just saying that if you start recycling, that's why they need a special building. Otherwise, if they could just be parked up anywhere, logic tells you we would do that, but you can't do that. And I know that there was good intentions of putting them on display, but unfortunately, they can't be displayed like that. So can we just please support this project and just get on with it?
All right, back to you, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks to the CFO for saving my right of reply to Councillor Rutherford. And I just want to make sure that we're all aware that there is no current project in the 10-year plan unless we support this. And so I think that this is a reasonable response. It's measured. We've got 4 years to plan it. As with everything in the 10-year plan, if it looks like we need to have more money to it, I'm sure someone will come back and tell us. We've got the option for external funding, and I think it's a reasonable and measured response, and so I'd ask you to support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, if we could vote, please. Oh, sorry, that's passed. 15 votes for, 1 against. Councillors, we're going to break for lunch now. So we'll be back into the chamber at 1:15. I was just going to say, have we put the potential rates increase up there? Right, it's up on the board there. All right. Okay, enjoy your lunch. We'll see you at 1:15.